Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This week's parasha is called Vayera, and it means to see, to observe, or to perceive, or to have a vision. And we find Abraham sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. It says, Yisa enaiv. He lifted his eyes, and he saw three men, or angels, standing near him. This simple act of lifting our eyes implies devotion, reverence, and hope in the God who walks with us. He didn't complain about the heat. He didn't complain about how much pain he was in. Remember, he had just had his circumcision. What he did was immediately run to greet his guests, and he ensured that they were well taken care of. In contrast, last week in Lech Lecha, when Lot lifted his eyes, he was seeking out the best land for his cattle. His attitude was material and completely self-serving, while Abraham's focused on the spiritual and on serving others. In this modern world where so many people have their heads buried in their smartphones or their eyes are down because they're so filled with anxiety, they rarely lift their eyes. There's a sense of, that sense of we is lost, and everyone seems to be focused on themselves. In Bereshit 18:10, Sarah overhears one of the men telling Abraham that when he would return at the same time next year, she would have given birth to a son. Sarah laughed, as would any woman who at 18 was told that she would get pregnant. But when asked why she laughed, she lied and said, "I did not laugh," because she was afraid. This was followed by a simple statement: "You did laugh." She was being challenged to face her fear and her shame. You know, our egos are so self-protective, and it's hard for us to admit when we have done wrong or when we have said something wrong. A sense of shame instantly rises within us. But instead of acknowledging what we did, we hide, or we try to cover it up with a false sense of pride. But no words are wasted in the Torah, and this reminds me of how God had confronted Adam. Who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I commanded you not to eat? They also didn't face what they had done. That's human nature. Shame has been with us from the very beginning. However, the Torah teaches us that we can lift up our eyes to the heavens instead of keeping our heads bowed down in shame. We can choose to swallow our pride. We can face our fears. And like the angel who said to Sarah, "You did laugh," we can find one true friend who is not afraid to tell us the truth and who encourages us to take that step which helps us to grow. You know, God was about to bring an apocalypse upon these two evil cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And God said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? For I have singled him out, I have set him apart, so that he may instruct his children and his posterity, his descendants, to keep the way of Adonai by doing what is just and right, so that Adonai may bring about for Abraham what has been promised him." These few words are so rich with meaning and information. They tell us that we are responsible for preparing the next generation for what's to come. God didn't hide the ugly truth from Abraham about what he was about to do. Rather, he didn't emphasize the destruction. Let me start again. God didn't hide the ugly truth from Abraham about what he was about to do, but he didn't emphasize the destruction. Rather, He redirected our attention to the secret of how to fulfill God's promise to Abraham, which was that he would become a great and populous nation, and that all the nations of the earth would bless themselves by him. How? When we see the state of the world and try to figure out what it needs or what needs to be done to fix it, it seems like an impossible task. Sometimes the destruction of cities like Sodom and Gomorrah is needed because the depravity we have fallen into is just too great. So God is telling us that in order to be blessed by God's promise to Abraham, we need to do what is just and what is right. That's the solution. That's the root. That's the bottom line. We know from Abraham's negotiation with God that what would have saved Sodom and Gomorrah was at least, if they could find at least 10 righteous people. But how do we know what is just and what is right? Well, that's what will be revealed on our journey through these stories of the Torah. We've just begun to read about the men and women who struggled in their walk with God, how they failed, how they lowered their eyes in shame when they recognized the truth of what they had done. But then we learn about how they were able to start again and lift their eyes to the heavens. This is the pattern set throughout the ages for his people. He provides everything we need. We are the ones who fail. We are the ones who turn from him. But we learn that God never abandons us, and that he always provides a way forward, and that he sends angels to help us. Abraham, who was a righteous man, lied twice about Sarah being a sister in order to save his own life. But God blessed him each time. Seems confusing, but this is what gives us the courage to keep pushing on, pushing forward in our lives. Here again, we see that the Torah does not waste words, even though we sometimes gloss over them. After the messengers had warned Lot and his family to leave Sodom before it was destroyed, Bereshit 19:16 begins with Vayitmama, and he hesitated, or he lingered, he delayed. This was the opposite of what Abram did when he was told to leave the home of his fathers, to leave his pagan roots behind. Sodom's paganism had become second nature to Lot, and he had fallen prey to its depravity. It's impossible to understand how he could have offered his 2 virgin daughters to the men of Sodom. But if we apply that to this world today, do we not offer up our unborn babies to the God of convenience? Let's not kid ourselves about not being affected by the lifestyle of the society in which we're living. This is what has happened time and again to God's people, whether we're living in exile or whether we're living in Eretz Israel. We've chosen to be like the nations instead of representing the God who formed us to reach out to these nations. In chapter 19:9, when Lot tried to tell the people of Sodom not to commit such atrocities, they accused him. Who do you think you are? You're the one who came here as a stranger, a ger, and now you sit as a judge? Like Lot, we will always be regarded as strangers in a foreign land. And like Lot, wherever we settle, we will eventually be hated and rejected until God sends his messengers to rescue us. We see how Lot's daughters were also affected by the culture of Sodom. They decided to have sex with their father to continue his lineage. But remember, God had not yet made it clear to humanity in his Torah what was acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And didn't Judah's Canaanite daughter-in-law Tamar do the same thing to preserve his lineage? And didn't Judah say that she was more righteous than he? So what can we learn from this? Well, Lot's daughters named their sons Moab and Ammon. Both became enemies of Israel. Yet Ruth, who was from Moab, a Moabitess, and when she chose to follow the God of Israel, King David would emerge from her lineage. And Tamar, who gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah, we see Perez would be the ancestor of King David, both sides. Another pattern emerges. The Torah is clear. No one is perfect. We all fail. But God turns every situation around, using it for good to those who strive to be just and right. So what does this all mean for us today? We are once again living in very frightening times. Less than 2 generations ago, 80 years, a generation is 40, 80 years ago, we suffered the nightmare of the Nazis' Holocaust. Today, we are still reeling from the vicious terrorist attack against the Jewish people on October 7th, 2023. The vast majority of people believe that the terrorists who initiated that attack are the victims, while the victims who were raped and tortured and murdered are said to be the perpetrators. And now, New York City, the victim of the September 11th, 2001 attack on the Twin Towers by Islamic terrorists, have just voted in a Muslim mayor. Many Jews, including Bernie Sanders, voted for him. You know, I had heard that many Jews had voted for Hitler, and now I can see how. Then we wonder how my people and all those who stand with us have become targets of hate, like Charlie Kirk. The word annihilation is once again more than just whispers. It's being shouted out in the streets and hailed as a just cause. Even Canada, once a haven of freedom, is undergoing dramatic changes, and not for the better. So what do we do? Like Abraham, we keep our eyes lifted up and focus on doing what is just and what is right. You know, this portion ends as it began, with Abraham lifting his eyes. But his would be the most challenging test that anyone could ever have to face. He would have to offer his beloved son Isaac as a burnt offering. However, Bereshit 22:13 states that Abraham lifted his eyes, and behold, he saw a ram behind him, caught in the thicket by its horns. Lifting our eyes is an act of hope and the recognition that God holds in his hands the solution for all our problems. In a time when the world seems to be drowning once again in hopeless situations, these stories in the Torah offer us more than a glimmer of hope. They show us that our God, the God of Israel, is ever present, and that he will never abandon any of us who lift our eyes, who wait to hear his voice, and who follow him as Abraham did. I am a witness to this in my life. that our Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven, watches over us during both the good and the bad times. We are reminded of that every Shabbat when we sing Esa Enai, Shear Ma'alot. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from Adonai, the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. We read that in Psalm 121. Shabbat Shalom.